And then we had all these facts about P's hardships, which is P's partner is losing his job. They can't pay their bill. She's going to be terminated if she doesn't get the vaccine. She doesn't want to get the vaccine because of her religious belief, which means her First Amendment rights are violated, right? So we have both these parties that have a hardship. And if you correctly concluded they will both suffer some sort of hardship, whether this is granted or not granted, you're correct, right? So you would have got points for just talking about this is what D's hardship is, and then this is what P's hardship is, and explaining why they're substantial. Then you would have got more points explaining, well, why is P's hardship more substantial than D's hardship? Or why is D's hardship more substantial than P's hardship, right? So again, first stating, here's their hardships. They're both substantial for this reason. And now let's go ahead and balance them against each other. So for P, you need one argument. You would say P's hardship is more substantial because D can use other methods to protect its patients and dental staff, such as mask, regular testing for staff, negative treatments, tests before treatment. A lot of you mentioned that. And you had to compare this explicitly to D's hardship, right? Where D's hardship is they can do other things, but P's hardship is if you don't grant the injunction, she's not going to be able to support her family. And also she's going to have her religious beliefs. She won't be able to practice them, and her First Amendment rights are violated. That's highly valued. So if you believe in First Amendment rights more, then, well, P's hardship is going to be more substantial than D. The flip side is, well, D's hardship is more substantial because P can always get a job elsewhere, and she's the only person claiming her rights were violated at this current point, right? Versus if you do grant this injunction, well, D is going to now expose all its patients and dental staff to high rates of COVID transmission because the vaccine can't be required. It's a large company, and it makes it more difficult for them to manage COVID transmission at their offices. Also, patients and dental staff have been complaining or show shared concerns, so they might quit or even stop coming to the Dentacare's offices. And then finally, it exposes members of the underserved communities to COVID death and illness because D serves this population. And like the data said, they're the community that's experiencing higher rates of, again, death and illness. Now, whichever way you concluded, I didn't really care, right? There were more arguments for D. You only really needed one, but some of you argued multiple ones. So you racked up a lot of points in this section. And you argued multiple ones for P and D. But you just had to do, again, what are P's hardships, what are D's hardships, and then balance them against each other to explain which one's more substantial and why, right? And that was for balancing of the hardships. The final one was public interest. There were a ton of facts here too, where it was pretty much all the same facts we just talked about. You know, COVID-19 is a disease, the data about how many people have died, how many people have been infected, underserved communities having higher rates, Dentacare serving the underserved communities and having over 500 employees, Dentacare passing the policy because people shared concerns and were doing dental treatment. And then, of course, Piper now refusing to get the vaccine because of her First Amendment rights, right? Which means there might be people similarly situated. Here, you should have actually done arguments for both sides again and explained why granting P's injunction would not hurt the public. So some people just talk about how P herself would hurt the public or D would hurt the public or just talk about the public generally. The one thing you need to really do to get full points in this section was to connect it back to the injunction, right? And the injunction's impact on the public. And here, even if you granted P's injunction, it wouldn't hurt the public because D can still implement other COVID-19 policies, right? Like, again, requiring the mask, negative tests, doing treatment. Also, requiring D to create a less broad company policy will help enforce the country's beliefs, which is the freedom to practice your religion. So just because we're having them have more narrow policies isn't necessarily a bad thing because we're also promoting the right to practice your religion, right? We don't want Piper and others to have to, I guess, be discriminated against because of their religion and not have the right to be employed. And then there are also likely others who are in similar positions. So they might sue D later, and we don't want that either. Because we don't want now to open the floodgates, what some people wrote in terms of these objections to these vaccine policies. Now, you also should have argued D's arguments, because I think this could have gone either way, and say, well, yes, granting P's injunction would hurt the public because This has been an issue for 2 years. Many people have died. Many people are infected. It obviously hasn't been handled. And vaccine requirements like this could help large companies control COVID-19 and stop the spread of COVID-19. Also, all the facts there about the underserved communities experiencing higher rates of death and illness, and the staff complaining and patients complaining, was for you to see there is a community of people that are scared to get dental treatment and have this close contact. And now these vaccines might create a new method of safety or comfort for this population of people, or reduce the transmission between them, which would help the public. But if we don't allow D to have this policy and grant P's injunction, well, the public will suffer, right? If you talked about the court's reluctance to grant the relief of judicial supervision is required over a long period of time, I gave you points for it, but it wasn't a huge issue because they're unlikely to require a lot of judicial supervision. Either the policy will be constitutional or not, and then the parties will just move on based on that requirement, right? Or that order. So there's a lot of analysis here, lots of points. You just needed to conclude at the end why you think that a preliminary injunction should be granted or not. Based on all your analysis, it didn't matter either way. I didn't care. You just needed a conclusion. And then that would have taken you to the next prompt, which is equitable estoppel, which was worth about half the points of preliminary injunctive relief. So you should have spent most of your time on preliminary injunctive relief because there was just so many facts and counter arguments and inferences you could have made. For equitable relief, this is where I saw people have timing issues, or they just didn't understand the rule. So they were unable to get the points, the full points for analyzing these 4 elements. And the 4 elements were: the party to be estopped knew the facts, the party intended his conduct to be acted on, or the party asserting estoppel has the right to believe it so intended. The latter must be ignorant of the true facts, and the latter must rely on the former's conduct to his injury. People really struggled to figure out who was the party to be estopped and what were the facts that we were dealing with. But the facts from the fact pattern that were triggering this issue was, in its notification, Dentacare reminded Piper that during her interview, she shared that she would not have any issues complying with any existing and future COVID-19 company policies. And because of this statement, Dentacare selected Piper over another candidate. So basically, Piper made a representation, Dentacare selected Piper. Now Piper said, oh, I'm not going to follow the COVID policies, and now you can't even enforce it against me, but I'm already hired. So now Dentacare is trying to say, well, now you can't use this representation you made. You made this representation, we hired you based on this. You can't now assert preliminary injunctive relief against us because you made this representation and we would never hired you if you never said it, right? That's the situation we have. And that means the party to be estopped is P, right? We're trying to stop P from asserting preliminary injunction against D. And the facts that we're talking about is whether P was going to follow D's COVID-19 policies, right? So did P know that she wasn't going to follow the COVID-19 policies? And there were a lot of good arguments for people who understood which party we were dealing with. And P's arguments, no facts suggest D told her it was selecting her over another candidate. She did share she would comply with company policies, but she didn't know that that was a deal breaker, right? I thought that was the more obvious argument, but you could have also gone the defendant's way. You just had to argue one side, and then if you did both, it would have been a bonus. But D's arguments, well, even if P didn't know D considered her promise to comply with COVID-19 policies, she should have known this was an important part of the employment terms because COVID-19 has been a worldwide problem for the last 2 years, and vaccines have been controversial, and they talked about it during the interview, right? So she should have knew the facts in terms of COVID-19 policies are an issue. I'm not going to follow it, but I'm just going to pretend to say it, or, I'm going to have to follow it. Like, she was the one in control of whether she knew what she would actually do in terms of the COVID-19 policies, right? But again, you could have concluded either way here. I didn't really care. You just had to kind of understand that P is the party to be stopped and analyze her knowledge in terms of whether she was going to follow the COVID-19 policies. I think a couple of people argued that, she didn't know there was going to be a vaccine, or some people said she did know, but during the interview, there was nothing that stated that she was told about the vaccine. Like, that was a new policy that D enacted after she was employed. But here you just kind of had to have some discussion about her knowledge to get points. And then two, whether P intended the contact to be acted on or the party had the right to believe it intended. Again, no facts suggest P intended for D to select her over another candidate because of what she said. But same D's arguments would be, well, she should have realized, compliance is an important part of the company and candidacy. Again, because COVID's been a worldwide problem over the last 2 years and vaccines are controversial, right? And here, this is where, again, you could have gone either way. It wasn't a big deal, but you're now talking about what she actually intended, which is hard to say because there weren't any facts about her actual intent, or kind of looking at it from D's point of view and what D had the right to believe based on, Piper's assertion or representation. As for the last two elements of equitable estoppel, those should have been really fast, right? Because there's really only one way, ignorant of the true facts. No facts suggest D knew that P was not willing to comply with these policies. Like there was nothing that suggested he knew or the Dentacare knew about her religious beliefs. And it was very obvious that they relied on it because the facts stated that she was selected over another person because of the statement she made. So it did act based on her statement that she would follow existing and future COVID-19 policies by selecting her over another person, right? So C and D were very obviously met, but whether, P actually had the intent or D had the right to believe, or whether P knew the facts or not, that was a little bit grayer. You could have wiggled your way either supporting either party there and then concluded one way or the other. So similar to the preliminary injunctive relief and equitable declaratory relief, you could have gone really either way. It didn't really matter to me. And after you've done equitable estoppel, you have the last section, which is framing. And the question is, if the court did grant Piper's preliminary injunctive relief, how should the injunction be framed? There were only really 5 to 8 points available here. You just had to state the rule. It's supposed to be specific in terms and describes in reasonable detail the act or acts sought to be restrained. And then you have your who, what, where, and when, right? Who is D? D cannot require any of its employees to get vaccinated as a condition of employment. Some people were trying to talk about how the injunction should be framed against P or how it should be framed for P. But remember, this injunction is going to be an order against D in terms of D not being able to enforce its policy. So careful reading comprehension here. If you didn't have that, you would have lost points on your analysis. Where this applies to all of D's employees, 500 of them, or it only applies to P, you could have kind of explained what you think the scope would have been. And then when this takes effect immediately, which means P shouldn't be terminated in 2 weeks. P cannot be terminated until the merits of the claim are decided, right? This is how I would have framed it. But if you framed it in a way that kind of covered these categories and made sense, I still gave you full points for it. But that's pretty much all you needed for the midterm. If you have questions, let me know. Take a deeper look at the rubric and the 2 student sample answers that did a really good job. And you could see what was possible under the time constraints. And then we'll talk about this more at our next class session. Thanks.